Welcome back to Gold Derby. I'm Christopher Rosen. I'm so pleased to be joined by Joe Anderson, the cinematographer on Mrs. Davis, a fantastic show that I have not really stopped thinking about. I guess I just wanted to start for you. Like, Joe, what was the overall approach? I know you did, I think, episodes 1, 2, 5, and the finale. So I guess like just overall, what was like the initial approach to the visuals and kind of like how you kind of found an entry point into this story that is, obviously incredible. It has such a huge scope and scale.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. The screenplay was pretty unique in that the screen direction was very elaborate. I hope the screenplays for the show do get shared online because I think screenwriters and just fans of the show or filmmakers would really kind of take interest in um, just kind of the nature of how they described the energy of the show. And a lot of the discussion we had during prep was, okay, how do we translate these amazing descriptions into things that appear on camera? And a lot of that was the personality of the camera. Um, this was kind of not ever set up as kind of this dark, mysterious show, though of course there are elements of that. Um, we never kind of the overall fun of the show was kind of the point. And I think particularly with the first episode, the pilot had what is kind of quite literally described as a Looney Tunes style chase that kind of set the tone for kind of at least the first chapter of this story. So we kind of just leaned into that and took lots of references from Chuck Jones cartoons. We kind of tried to make some of our desert exteriors kind of look like, Wile E. Coyote chases. But we also just kind of leaned into the fun of it. It's such a pastiche of a project that, there's guys riding around in convertibles. And so we referenced, David Lynch, Wild at Heart. Um, there's lots of Fight Club references. Lots of, for me, Pee Wee Herman, Pee Wee's Big Adventure was a big reference.
Mm.
So kind of threw all that stuff into the stew and, let it simmer a bit. And, that was the fun creative part. And then we had to kind of figure out how we actually pull all this off. And that was a lot of technical, very complicated stuff.
Well, let me hear. I love that Pee Wee's Big Adventure thing. It's so funny. I've thought of like I've heard like people involved in the show say like Looney Tunes, like Betty Gilpin called I think like Looney Tunes Hamlin stuff. It's so funny you mentioned Pee Wee because I was like I never thought of that until you just said it. And now I'm like, oh wow, yes, that is really a great the tone of it, and that's like a lot of the imagery too. I think is such a great reference point for it. I just can't I can't believe it kind of I guess maybe through osmosis I thought of that because it's like or whatever. I didn't realize it directly. But you mentioned like how you pulled it off like all how did you pull it off like on like the technical aspects of it I think are incredible, and especially like we said like there's so many different tones and scenes of like big spectacle, and you're kind of going starting in the middle at the opening of the show, which we kind of come back to in the fifth episode of this Knights Templar setting, all these incredible sequences and set pieces, and like you said like in all different tones and stuff. I guess like where'd you start technically? How do you even do this?
I think I am a little bit of a film nerd, so I do have a bit of a kind of library in my head. Um, but we also just have all these amazing tools like Shot Deck, which is a website that is compiled of just at this point thousands of different projects. That's all keyword searchable. There's lots of other things, Film Grab. There's lots of resources online where it's easy for the storytellers to just kind of grab a bunch of reference images. Let's start like looking at them, ruminating on them, seeing what feels right for this scene, for that scene. So we kind of created this dialogue that way, where I would go pull some images, show them to Owen Harris, the director, show them to Emma Fairley, the production designer, and we kind of just found our way to kind of navigate this pretty kind of epic story where, like you said, we have 14th century France, we have deserted island, we have um, you know Wile E. Coyote races, we got motorcycle jumps. So we just kind of took every scene as it was and tried to find references, and hopefully we could find things that were familiar but not stuff that was too obvious that we were just stealing from. The show deals with cliches. That's kind of one of the things, kind of like when you do a Google search, the very first topic that comes up, some of the writing kind of toys with that idea. So we kind of leaned into some of these kind of obvious references, but tried to not feel like it was, like we were stealing too much from any particular project.
The show also obviously deals with so much about like AI and also religion, and those are like such main themes. I guess like visually, how did you think of those? I guess we could start with AI. Like, how did you think of like the AI aspect impacting like what you were doing as DP?
It's a funny thing because the show is called Mrs. Davis, which is a algorithm, but we never get to see that. We never get to hear it. We never get to see code or anything. So, imaging Mrs. Davis was very tricky. And we kind of, I'll tell you what, I think I got this project from one shot that I did on another project that I shot. A couple of years ago, I shot a movie called The Old Man and the Gun, Robert Redford's final movie. I grew up in Utah, so having Sundance in the background was kind of, part of my childhood. So it was great to kind of get to shoot his final film. And we kind of wanted that movie to feel not totally kind of perfectly technically pristine. We wanted it to have a lot of character. The camera was lots of like very creative and fun and curious. And there was one shot that happened where it was Redford driving the car, me in the back seat, and the director David Lowery in the front seat. And we just went and drove around Texas for about an hour, grabbing kind of shots of Redford's character who's just robbed a bank. And he has an earpiece because he's got a hearing aid, but it's connected to the police scanner. So he's one step ahead of the police. And there's a shot where I just grabbing focus, camera was rolling. I zoomed in on the earpiece, grabbed focus, zoomed out. And David Lowery loved that moment and kept that in the movie. It's also in the trailer. So I think when Owen Harris was trying to find an American cinematographer to work with, because he's a Brit, and this was his kind of first big long-term project in the US. I don't know how, but this Old Man and the Gun came across his desk, and I think there was just something about that shot that kind of hooked him. And so we were kind of able to bring that to Mrs. Davis. We only ever see her as she's kind of interacting with people through kind of strangers through through earbuds. So we kind of played with that. We'd kind of have these Zooms whenever someone was talking with Mrs. Davis. And but yeah, that was one of the funny challenges of just having a main character that you never get to actually see or hear.
That's awesome, and that is a great movie. I feel like a very good Old Man. Old Man and the Gun is really good, and I think a lot of people hopefully still catching up with it or whatever. But I mean, it's a very good film, and I do love your work in that as well. Yeah. I guess like what was that? One of the things I want to ask you too then about was like with the religious aspect of it as well, and how you kind of approach those scenes, especially in the first episode, because we don't know that Jay is Jesus, right? So like you're kind of like we're in this location in this place that is we're not sure of and will have obviously greater meaning later. So I guess like how did you approach that sequences as well?
We didn't actually kind of give any kind of special weight to the fact that Jay's character is Jesus. I think the show is quite respectful to faith, though I think it's not explicit, it's certainly not accurate to kind of any historical concept of Christianity necessarily. But we kind of just treated Jay as a character, just like any of the other characters. The kind of the mystery of it all, would present itself soon enough. There's kind of a little note. If you watch it on second viewing, you'll notice that she says, Jesus, you got to be so serious, or something like that. So we're already planting that kind of ahead of the time. But yeah, we love this character. Andy, who played him, just is incredible. The arc of that whole sequence, he's stuck in this space, and finally at the end of the series, he's kind of liberated. is just really kind of this nice, soulful backbone to the entire series, which has got all this other stuff going on. The final scene where she says goodbye to him is the entire crew is tearing up while we're shooting that. And it's, yeah, really, really sweet, kind of brilliant little brushstroke in the show to do that.
Did you have like when like you like the performances I think are really great, like you said, like, and it's like they're able to mine such emotion from like sometimes like the show is silly at times too, right? Like there is like a lot of different tones here that are really fun, and Betty is so good at that, and I think the whole cast kind of comes with her and follows along on those tones. I guess like what was it like, like getting like watching those performances, I guess, and then like are you kind of keeping track and making sure that they're all in the pocket, I guess, or is that like how are you kind of like playing with those performances and like making sure that it's working?
Yeah, I mean, I think, every cinematographer would kind of like to think that we're not just focused on technical stuff in the moment, that we're also able to kind of, maybe give a little bit of advice if we think something's not quite working. But really, kind of Betty was the kind of real hero of all that. She's talked about she spent years kind of not being number one on the call sheet, and she's used to kind of day playing, where you kind of come into a show and you have to kind of very quickly as an actor figure out what your role is in all of this. And she was really amazing at, particularly with some of the actors that were proxies. I mean, what a bizarre casting call that must have been. But she was really, really a wonderful collaborator, both for the actors that she was working with and for the rest of the crew, in terms of, if there was ever someone like didn't quite understand the tone or the sense of humor, she was really amazing at kind of like helping them with that. And then Owen Harris, who the director, he's got a background on Black Mirror, which has got a lot of this kind of sci-fi concepts going on. He also did some Monty Python work more recently, and I just think there's just something about those two things coming together is a really good thing for Mrs. Davis.
How about in the fifth episode you did, which I love, is I think that's one where they're on the desert island, right, and they're hearing all the backstory of the Grail and the opening of we're going back to the opening to like kind of revisit that and all these great things. I love that so much. Their performances in there, obviously, Betty and Jake McDormand are absolutely hilarious. But just like visually, I think the setting of the island is so great and kind of definitely reminded me a little of Lost, obviously from like Damon, the co-creator Damon Lindelof. So I guess like like how is the approach of that scene and that sequence? And again, like yeah, like just that even them sitting there like around like the campfire, basically. Like I just think that whole thing is so that's just a great scene, and I just love that, and that whole episode is so much fun.
Yeah, we called that episode the Princess Bride episode because it is a story that we keep interrupting and we keep going back to the storyteller. Um, I also think Damon kind of had a little fun with that because I think there's just enjoying the experience of an audience trying to guess what the story is going to be. And Arthur, the character, is keeps saying, "Guys, do you want to just listen to me tell the story or what?" So yeah, we shot that. Very, I think, in a kind of a bold way where we tried to shoot it in sequence as the sun was setting. So the episode starts, noon. And by the time the story's over, we're, in a campfire. And so we had that, and then we kind of had to contrast that with this story that took place in the 90s. We kind of referenced Amelie for that stuff and kind of gave that a different look so we could kind of quickly jump back and forth between these two different worlds. But that was also one of the last things we shot. We shot it in Spain. And by that point, the actors knew each other so well that they really kind of brought a lot of extra. They could have just been, saying the lines and sitting there, but they really leaned into it. And Jake and Betty at that point knew each other so well and knew the characters so well that they got to really bring a lot to that scene as well.
Did you only do it in like one, like with, like you said, like doing it kind of in real time? Was that just like literally like one day then that you did it, or did you have to come back like a next day, or like how like much time do you have for it?
We did it over 2 days.
Okay.
One of the things on the show, there's not much set in a studio. It's a lot of locations, a lot of exteriors. So we really had to kind of build the schedule around where the sun is. As a cinematographer who's based in New York, who's worked in England a lot, that's a little bit new to me, going to California, going to Spain, and doing lots of exteriors. That was a new challenge to really kind of master working with the sun. So we ended up shooting that scene over 2 days, where the night stuff, there was, Arthur, I think, had like a 5-page monologue at one point. So it took a long time to kind of nail it, even though the actors, some miraculous way, had memorized their lines. But the amount of coverage that stuff needed to really make it kind of epic, we did it over 2 nights, actually.
Was like you're saying, like, I mean, like, this is a mass. There's so much scale in the show. Is that, like, I mean, is there a single thing then that was like the biggest challenge, or is it just like the whole thing, like you said, like trying to like just put your wrap around all of these things, and like we said, all these different exteriors and sets and locations and all these different things.
I mean, we used to chuckle when we'd see the schedule, because it would be like, okay, Monday, we're doing a montage where nuns make jam. The next day, we're going to blow the jam up and shower it on them. Wednesday, we have a motorcycle jump. And then by the end of the week, we're doing a night exterior where like a car has to crash through a billboard. So it was just hilarious, just kind of how much was going on. And, no one person had ever done all these things. So it wasn't like there was one expert who kind of got to have a big ego. We were kind of all just kind of along for the ride. And so, yeah, I think the general idea was just how to keep it one cohesive story while all these different kind of things are coming at you. And luckily, we had people that had worked with Damon before and kind of knew some of his kind of, values. And it was just a creative, collaborative environment where the DP could have a little idea for a script thing that we could add in there, or an art director could have an idea for something that would kind of make something extra special. So it was a really great team that they assembled to do this.
Yeah, I got to talk to Betty earlier, and she was saying like how everyone kind of bought into this so well, and I think that like makes such a difference, like that for every department, every like crew member like was just so in on this project and like kind of enjoying doing it like as a group, which I think you kind of could see in the end result. I guess like we have to wrap up, but I guess like last thing, like what do you hope to take out of this project that what did you learn on this that you'll like take to the next thing, I guess?
I think, the thing I learned on this is just there's it's such a project that values kind of the human touch. We often, as professionals, try to make things look incredible and look, to a degree that they're so slick that sometimes they almost kind of look anonymous. And I just think it's a project that really kind of celebrated the fact that human beings are creating this series. It's got little warts and bumps and scruff, but it all is very meaningful and it's very heartfelt. And underneath all the kind of wackiness, there's some kind of actually kind of profound things to say about people and about our time in history. And that's just something I've kind of, in the projects that I'm most proud of, that's a little bit of a through line. And that really kind of came into focus on this show, is just choosing projects that kind of are a nice kind of artifact for a period in time. And I'm glad I got to be a part of it.
Yeah, it's so great. I actually lied because I have one last thing I want to ask you. The very last shot I think is amazing with the windmill. It's so good, and I just guess like I love what it means. I love the ending. It's such a great moment, and the smash cut into the credits. I love it so much. I guess like what was that like? How did you capture that? I guess in the last day there, I would imagine, or maybe one of the last days. Like yeah, like what went into that?
We it's set in Reno, but we shot it in Los Angeles, and we had to shoot we had to close down a big old street. So we had to shoot on over a weekend to close down a street in, I think it was in Burbank or North Hollywood. And it was just an iconic shot, and it was just some beautiful thing that they came up with in the script. And it's such a pleasure to kind of be able to shoot, kind of similar to the big piano scene shot in the end of episode 2. And then it's just a wonderful little bit of kind of mystery right at the end there that kind of you know dazzles people because the show is a magic trick, just
Yeah.
as a lot of the characters are magicians.
Yeah, it's like a little bit like an Inception ending, right? To bring another reference in, certainly.
Um,
Joe Anderson, this is great work. Mrs. Davis, all of the episodes are on Peacock. Everyone should definitely check it out because it's a lot of fun. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you.